Hello, and welcome to our webinar on the transition from school to adulthood. My name is Chesley Giertz, and I'm the Advocacy Director at the ARC of Northwest Wayne County. Our chapter of the ARC provides advocacy and assistance to people with developmental disabilities in order to participate fully in school and in the community. This presentation was made possible by a grant from Project Launch. Project Launch helps children and young adults with disabilities pursue meaningful careers, live as independently as possible, and enjoy inclusion at work and in the community. By the end of our webinar today, you will have an understanding of what transition planning is and why it's important, what should happen during the transition planning process, options for life when school is done, and community resources that you can use to make the most out of transition planning. There are many types of transitions throughout life, but the transition I'm focusing on today is the transition from school to adulthood. We know that all students need guidance in order to make the leap from high school to the next step. But oftentimes for students with disabilities, that leap requires more planning, whether that's for college, a career, a job, or independent living. We also know that the percentage of students with disabilities who attend college is low, and the percentage of adults with disabilities who are employed is also very low. One of the ways we can change that is by changing our expectations of students with disabilities while they're still in school, and by understanding how the transition planning process can be used to explore every possibility for post-secondary life. Transition planning is a required part of the IEP, starting during the year the student will turn 16. But it can start earlier if the IEP team decides it's appropriate to do so. Some organizations recommend starting transition planning at age 14 rather than 16, but 16 is still the required age. The purpose of transition planning is to get everyone thinking about the student's vision for their life, and to coordinate activities that will help them make that vision a reality. It should be totally focused on the student's strengths, preferences, and interests. And the process should be collaborative. That means that even though the school facilitates the process and handles the paperwork, students and families will be actively involved in this process and working together with the school to make it happen. The transition plan gets reviewed every year at the annual IEP, but in between meetings, there will be ongoing assessment of how things are going, and there will be activities to do along the way. Before I go any further, I'm going to take a moment to rewind a few years to middle school. Well before your student's IEP team starts the official transition planning process at age 16, the Michigan Merit Curriculum requires that all students in 7th grade, with and without disabilities, start an educational development plan. The purpose of the Educational Development Plan, or EDP, is to help students explore career interests and develop action plans for reaching their goals. The EDP gets started in 7th grade and must be completed in 8th grade before students go to high school. Schools can use a variety of formats to develop EDPs, including web-based systems that introduce students to different career pathways, offering a short class where the EDP will be developed, or meeting with a counselor one-on-one. The idea is to help students think about long-term education and career plans before entering high school. By going through this process, students learn more about themselves, consider different options for their future, and decide on what classes to take in high school. It helps students make a connection between what they're doing in high school and what they want to do when school is done. Information from the EDP can also be used to assist in transition planning. The EDP gets reviewed and updated every year, usually by the student's counselor. This is an example of an educational development plan format that was taken from the Kent County Schools website. In this example, a web-based platform called Career Cruising was used to assess the student's career interests and skills. This EDP includes scores that represent what the student knows right now, which can be used when figuring out what skills the student still needs to learn. Other types of assessment results are included here, like ACT results, a description of the student's learning style, information about the student's interests regarding work and school, and some information about the student's classes and course requirements. EDPs also include the student's future goals concerning work and education. And then some summary information about what activities and work experiences the student has been involved in. Your school district's EDP format could look very similar or very different from this one, but they will all contain most of the same elements. So now your student has their educational development plan, and they're starting to think about life after school. The law that governs special education, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, requires that IEP teams take that planning a step further by requiring the transition planning process. Again, the educational development plan gets completed in 8th grade for every student, regardless of disability. And transition planning starts the year students with IEPs turn 16. IDEA has required that transition plans must include these 4 components. Transition plans must include data from transition assessments, measurable post-secondary goals, services to reach those goals, and information about the transfer of rights at the age of majority. I'll talk more about each of these things in detail as the presentation goes on. But this ensures a process that is ongoing. The student and family and their teachers gauge the student's interests and progress in school. Goals are developed with the student's vision in mind. A plan for services and activities gets put into place, and students get informed about their rights once they turn 18. As I mentioned earlier, the transition planning process must be student-focused. The student's interests, preferences, and strengths need to be considered every step of the way, and who better to advocate for those things than the student? For many young people and adults, participating in IEP meetings can feel intimidating. So preparation and practice is key. There are many ways to prepare for and many ways to participate in the IEP and transition plan. Before an IEP meeting, teachers and families should talk with the students about their interests and their vision for life. Students can also prepare materials to share during the meeting. For example, I've seen students prepare PowerPoint presentations that they show at the start of the meeting, which really do set the agenda and the tone. PowerPoint presentations don't need to be anything fancy. They can be very basic, or they can include as much detail as the student would like. But the idea is to get everyone focused on the student and their input. Other students can show pictures depicting their strengths and goals. A student could even activate a switch to begin a slide presentation. There are many ways to prepare and participate during these meetings. I've seen other students memorize a few key points or have visual cues that they've prepared with their teacher to help them communicate what they want to say. Students could be provided with choice cards to indicate agreement or disagreement, or visual representations of the meeting topics so everyone can follow along. During the meeting, students should be encouraged to ask questions and give opinions rather than just listening. Students can also participate in leading the meeting, which could look like introducing each section, deciding when it's time to move on, introducing the IEP team members, or giving a review of their current performance levels. I certainly wouldn't want a student to come into one of these meetings totally unprepared, so again, preparation and practice before the meeting is key. Included in your resource list for today is the I'm Determined website, which has some great tools to help students get ready for these IEP conversations. One really neat tool is their one-pager that students can download and complete and then share at the IEP meeting. Or they can get the I'm Determined app, where they can fill out these documents from their phone or other device. Start having students attend even a portion of their IEP meeting in elementary or middle school so they start getting comfortable with the process. They don't need to attend the full meeting if that's not totally necessary, especially at that young of an age, but even coming for a portion helps them get an idea that this meeting really is all about them. They're the most important person in the room, and it helps students understand how they can start advocating for themselves as they get older. Here is the one-pager from the I'm Determined website that I had just mentioned a moment ago. I like this one-pager because it's very basic. This is a really nice way for students to reflect on their strengths and interests, or for families and students to have conversations about these things, and then organize their thoughts on paper so they can better articulate them to the school. The I'm Determined website also has short videos that talk about each area on this one-pager and give students information about how to go about filling out and using this one-pager. Let's talk now about the first required component of transition planning, which is transition assessments. Transition assessment is an ongoing process to gather information about the student's strengths, preferences, and interests as they relate to future living, learning, and working environments. This assessment process starts in middle school with the Educational Development Plan and continues until the student exits school. The information that's gathered during transition assessments is then used to guide the transition planning and IEP process. Some people like to think of this step as answering the question, where are we now? What is the student interested in at this point in time? What do they know now about the career or job they're interested in? And how are their work and study habits? Usually when we hear the word assessment, we think of something formal, like standardized tests. But transition assessments should include lots of things. Reviewing work samples to learn about academic strengths and most used accommodations. Having conversations with students and families to get a clear idea of their vision for the future, or to help students figure out what their vision is. Observations of the student in work-related tasks to see if they're on task, following directions, and getting along with others. Interest inventories and questionnaires to help narrow down interests, find out about past work-related experiences, and get an idea of what the student feels are their strengths and areas where they want to grow or improve. And lastly, standardized assessments can also be a component of transition assessments to help gather information about the student's interests and skills. A couple that I've seen used quite frequently are career cruising and the Student Transition Assessment Tool, or STAT-R, but there are many tools on the market. If you hear information that doesn't make sense to you when you're in a transition planning meeting, or you don't understand transition assessment scores that are being reported, you should ask for clarification or context. You can also ask what sorts of informal assessments were done if you're only hearing scores. If you're going through the transition plan but are feeling like it's a bit lackluster, you can ask for different assessments and information gathering to be done, and set a date by which you'll reconvene and look at an updated transition plan. These assessments really do provide a starting point for the whole team and inform the entire process, including developing some goals. Once assessments are done, the teacher will put together a draft transition plan as part of the annual IEP that gets reviewed and discussed during the IEP meeting. As I said a few moments ago, the information gathered through assessments, conversations, observations is used to develop post-secondary goals. Post-secondary goals are the second required part of transition planning. These are goals to be accomplished after exiting school. These goals will not be accomplished during school because the intent is to plan for the future when school is over. Post-secondary goals must be written in each of the 4 following areas: education, training, employment, and independent living, if applicable. These are going to be long-term goals for living, working, and learning as an adult. The projected post-secondary goals in the student's IEP establish a direction for the school, student, and their family and others to move toward. Again, having students participate in setting these goals is key, Students need to be invested in the goals because they pertain directly to them. Students and their families should talk about their vision for the future and be sure to share it with the school and keep repeating it. As I mentioned, the transition plan will usually already have post-secondary goals written in when you get to the meeting. Even though students and parents need to be involved in developing these goals, sometimes that input gets overlooked. Know that what you see when you get to the IEP meeting is a draft and can be changed based on what gets talked about during the meeting. Also keep in mind that transition goals will probably change several times as your child's interests develop through the years, and that's okay. The process of transition planning allows time for exploration and maturity so that your students' goals can start off broad and get more specific as they grow and develop. Transition goals are reviewed and updated every year along with the rest of the IEP. While assessments can be thought of as answering the question, where are we now? Post-secondary goals help answer the question, where are we going? Post-secondary goals have to be written in each of these areas: education, training, employment, and independent living if applicable. Oftentimes, education and training have a lot of overlap and can be condensed. Here I have some examples under each category. For education and training, a few examples of goals could be to attend a 4-year college for business management, participate in on-the-job training at Detroit Metro Airport, or participate in a skill building program to focus on time management. Another long-term post-secondary goal could be for employment, could be working part-time at a pet store while attending a 2-year college, and then after graduating, working full-time as a vet tech. And then working at the local hospital with a job coach is another example of an employment goal. For independent living goals, those could include something like living independently in an apartment, scheduling appointments, paying bills, and accessing services in the community by using the city bus. Another example of a long-term post-secondary goal could be to prepare for each day by dressing and feeding oneself with assistance. Sometimes it helps when developing post-secondary goals to think about creating a life and a schedule that runs separately from one's parents. Even if the student is planning on living in their family home for the foreseeable future, there is an opportunity here to visualize and plan for a life that runs independently of their parents. Now that assessments have been completed and post-secondary goals have been written, it's time to answer the question, how will we get there? And that brings us to the course of study. While the law doesn't require transition planning to start until the year the student turns 16, we know that conversations about diploma versus certificate of completion often happen much, much earlier. It would be ideal for the post-secondary goals to drive this conversation, but if your student is already in their sophomore or junior year of high school, the reality is that it's most likely already been talked about. The first course of study is what many consider a traditional course of study, exiting high school with a diploma. This involves meeting the Michigan Merit Curriculum standards, as well as any standards set by your local high school, and graduating with a diploma. In this case, school services end when the diploma is issued. Some of you may have heard the next term, personal curriculum, before. Personal curriculum is a tool for modifying the rigor of the Michigan Merit Curriculum if it is determined that the student's disability is the reason they're not able to access or demonstrate proficiency in the content. Personal curriculum is not a special education provision specifically, but students with IEPs are eligible. There is some more information on the personal curriculum handout that's included with the list of resources for today's presentation. And then, of course, career and technical education is an option and needs to be presented as an option by the school. The second option for course of study is to exit high school without a diploma. This is widely referred to as obtaining a certificate of completion. Different from exiting with a diploma, there is no established curriculum. Rather, the students' post-secondary goals in their transition plan drive course selections and everything else. Students with IEPs who do not earn a diploma are eligible for school services in Michigan through age 26. Career and technical education can also be a part of the student's course of study, even if they are not earning a diploma. Transition services are the third required component of transition planning. Transition services are a set of activities which help move the student toward achieving their post-secondary goals. It's important to know that many of the transition services or activities stated in the transition plan take place outside of school, at home and in the community. Transition services need to be identified under the same four core areas that the post-secondary goals address: education and training, employment, and independent living if needed. These services and activities must be based again on the student's needs and goals, again accounting for their strengths, preferences, and interests. Transition services should include the activities that the student and their community of adults will complete. Their community of adults can include their special or general education teachers, related service providers, school counselors or other school personnel, outside community agencies, family members, and other important people in the student's life. Here are some examples of transition services under each of the four core areas: training, employment, education, and independent living. Some examples of post services under training include study skills training, a social skills training or workshop, or practicing requesting accommodations. Examples of transition services under the education category can include instruction and modeling in how to advocate for oneself in class, getting some direct instruction in math, or taking a college tour. Under employment, some transition services could be learning to read and following a daily visual schedule, getting some community work experience, or getting a referral to vocational rehabilitation, which I'll talk about a little later in the presentation. And lastly, some examples of transition services for independent living include learn and master use of adaptive switches for kitchen appliances to prepare meals, memorize phone number, or getting direct instruction in practical math skills like money and making change. By the time the transition plan portion of the IEP wraps up, you should have a clear understanding of what activities everyone is going to attempt or accomplish by a certain time. If there are activities that families or students are having difficulty completing, the IEP team needs to reconvene and make a plan for assisting the family. It's ideal for the student, their family, and the school to really work together and collaborate on getting these things done. If you need help or if you have questions, reach out to the teacher and let them know. If you feel like your IEP team needs some support with transition planning, reach out to your district's special education administrator. Many times that person can offer creative thinking and support to you and the school team on how to plan and get things done. I included a link to a document that has many more transition services and activity examples, and that can also be found in your list of resources for this presentation. So we've hit on three of the required components of transition planning, which are assessments, post-secondary goals, and transition services. Now let's talk for a moment about the fourth requirement, which includes information about what's called the transfer of rights at the age of majority. On or before a student's 17th birthday, schools must tell students that when they turn 18, they are an adult and have certain rights. While their parents were in charge of making decisions before then, turning 18 means that parents do not automatically have that authority anymore. All students, regardless of their level of disability, must be informed of this. Information should be delivered in a way the student can understand. You can find a thorough list of student rights online, but I wanted to point out a few for you here. When students turn 18, they have the right to attend an IEP meeting. They have the right to give permission for testing and evaluations, and on the flip side of that, they have the right to deny permission for testing or evaluations. Students also have a right to approve or disapprove changes to their IEP. They have the right to access school records, and they have a right to disagree with the IEP team and to pursue dispute resolution options. I included some more information about rights at the age of majority in the list of handouts. Sometimes it's appropriate around this age for families and students to talk not only about these rights, but also to develop a plan for supporting students with making decisions and exercising their rights. More on that in just a minute. We've gone over the 4 components of transition planning: assessments, post-secondary goals, including the course of study, and transition services, including the age of majority conversation. All of these components fit together to make one cohesive transition plan. The transition plan then becomes part of the IEP document, and IEP goals should then be developed that support the transition plan. The educational development plan is also still in play and doesn't go away when transition planning begins. The educational development plan helps inform the transition plan, which informs the development of the IEP. If your student is not exiting school with a diploma and will be continuing with educational services through age 26, the transition planning process continues throughout that time as well and is reviewed at every annual IEP. Here is an example of a blank transition plan template that is frequently used here in Wayne County. The transition plan paperwork in your area is probably going to look different than this one, but the required elements are all the same. As you can see, there are some areas for the school to check off and fill in, including information about assessments that were done and the date of the educational development plan. And then we've got a section where the students' post-secondary goals are listed in those 4 core areas: education, training, employment, and independent living when applicable. Next is information about the student's course of study, high school diploma or no high school diploma. And here is where transition services are listed. Every area has to be considered and have something written down, except for the last 2, which only get filled in if the student has a need in those areas. And also included on this form is where the school indicates if any community agencies were present at the meeting. And I'm going to talk about one of those agencies in a few minutes. Coming back to our presentation, as students transition to adulthood and they and their families start looking forward to adult services, there are some other things to consider. Something you might be thinking about around this time is how best to assist a person with a disability in making decisions. The ARC promotes the concept that every person can make choices and has a right to make choices that affect them and their own life. Historically, guardianship has been the default option for families, but more and more families and organizations are looking for alternatives. Guardianship involves taking rights away from the person with the disability and transferring them to someone else, and it is not always the most appropriate option. Some alternatives to guardianship are listed here. Supported decision-making agreements involve the person with a disability documenting their preferences for getting support with decisions. The person would identify trusted advisors, such as friends, family members, or professionals, to serve as supporters. The supporters agree to help the person with a disability understand, consider, and communicate their decisions, and give the person with a disability the tools to make their own informed decisions. I included a brochure in the list of handouts that has some great information about supported decision-making in Michigan. Another more well-known alternative to guardianship is power of attorney. Power of attorney is a good option for people who want to designate someone as the person who will help them make decisions and will have access to information on their behalf. A person does not need to communicate verbally or even fully understand every word in the document in order to designate a power of attorney. To draw up power of attorney documents, you should consult with an attorney. One other tool that can be used to support someone in decision making is representative payee. This is exclusively a term for the Social Security Administration. A representative payee is the person designated to assist the person with a disability with managing their Social Security funds. I've included a few other important tasks to take care of as your student transitions to adulthood. If your student doesn't have a driver's license, head to the Secretary of State and get a state ID. Register to vote. People with disabilities are valuable constituents and have the right to vote like anyone else. Poll workers are not qualified to determine someone's capacity to vote, and a person with a disability cannot be turned away from the polls. Mail-in ballots are another way to access the voting process. Register for the Selective Service, or the draft. This is still a requirement for all males. They must register within 30 days of turning 18, no matter the nature of their disability. If the draft ever gets implemented again, men would be called into service through a random lottery system. At that time, you would have the opportunity to provide any medical documentation needed for exemption, and likely would not need to go forward with any additional testing. At age 18, your student will also be able to apply for benefits as an individual. The most common benefits to apply for at this time are SSI and Medicaid. SSI, or Supplemental Security Income, is a needs-based program, meaning that a person's income is considered first when determining eligibility. Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, comes with Medicaid, pays for food and shelter, and comes as a standard monthly amount. The current maximum amount for SSI at this time is $794. A second program that is also administered by the Social Security Administration is the Retirement Survivors and Disability Insurance Program, or RSDI. This is an insurance program for people who pay into the plan through their payroll taxes. It comes with Medicare, and the amount a person receives is based on how much work they have done in the past and how much they have paid into the insurance program. Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, is most likely going to be the program you will want to apply for, since your student most likely does not have enough work experience to be eligible for RSDI. These benefits are important to put into place sooner rather than later for a few reasons. First, Medicaid is the insurance that pays for community mental health services, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment. Any services your child may need as an adult, including paid staff or caregiver support, gets paid for by Medicaid. Second, you want to make sure that these benefits get put into place while you are able to help apply and work out any issues that may arise. A crisis is not the time to try to put these things together. You want these benefits to be in place and ready to use. And third, schools can provide reports and evaluations that are helpful to the SSI application process. So starting the application while you still have that connection is helpful. To apply for SSI, go to the website ssa.gov, and that stands for Social Security Administration. Then you'll click on the menu option and click Supplemental Security Income. It's pretty easy to get lost or confused on the website because you'll see the word disability popping up all over the place. But oftentimes, the website is referring to the Retirement Survivors and Disability Insurance, or what some people call Social Security Disability. So you want to make sure that you click on Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. Then you'll complete the online application. Again, after clicking on Menu and Supplemental Security Income, you'll be taken to a page that includes, I believe it's a blue button that says Apply Online for SSI and Disability Benefits. You'll want to click on that to find the application. Then you will schedule an in-person appointment. Make sure to bring the applicant to the appointment as well as copies of your documents. When you are completing the application and related forms, this is not the time to focus on strengths. This is the time to focus on functional limitations. You are being asked to report on how the disability of your son or daughter significantly limits their ability at this time to do basic work activities. If they are able to do basic work activities with support, think about what their ability to do basic work activities would be if there was no support available, and complete the application with that in mind. And remember, support can include anything from giving reminders or prompts to do something or to finish a job, all the way up to hand-over-hand assistance. So think about your child completing basic work activities with absolutely no support or prompting, and that's how you want to fill out this application. Another tip is that it's a good idea to call and schedule an in-person appointment after you've done the online application. Sometimes, when Social Security Administration workers can put a face with a name, it will increase the likelihood of an approval. Since SSI is to be used for food and shelter, you'll need to think about how much you'll be charging your child for those things, and include that information in the application process. If your adult child is not going to be paying their fair share for food or shelter, they may qualify for a reduced SSI amount or no SSI at all. And if you do apply for SSI and get denied, be sure to appeal. Many times, cases that had been denied get approved upon appeal. A few more tips at the bottom there. Do not apply for the wrong program. So if you're going in and you're intent on applying for supplemental security income, do not apply for the retirement, survivor, and disability insurance. Do not apply before your child turns 18. After your child turns 18, only their income and assets are considered in the application. But before 18, every adult in the household has their income and assets considered. So again, if your child is 18 and applying for SSI, do not include parents' income or asset information. Our chapter of the ARC has a workshop series, including an entire session on SSI. So if you're interested in learning more about the SSI application process, please reach out to me and I can share those workshop dates with you. Once you've got SSI and Medicaid in place, you can start thinking about community mental health services. Community mental health services are administered by individual counties in Michigan and are offered to people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, substance use disorders, and mental illnesses who also have Medicaid. So here's where the Medicaid comes into play. The services and supports you need will most likely be paid for by Medicaid through the community mental health system. Services can include supports coordination or case management, which is a person who helps to link you up with any support or service you may need. Can also include paid staff or caregivers, transportation, skill building or supported employment programs, and peer supports. Paid staff is probably one of the biggest things that Medicaid and community mental health provide. That means, again, hiring paid staff to provide whatever assistance is needed to increase or maintain your personal self-sufficiency, to participate in the community, and to be productive and as independent as possible. Paid staff can be provided in a person's home or out and about in the community. To find your local community mental health service provider and enroll, go to michigan.gov/MDHHS, which stands for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Then click on Behavioral Health and Developmental Disability. Next, click Mental Health, and then click Community Mental Health Services to find the map of programs county by county. When you click on your county, your community mental health agency will appear with a phone number to call to enroll. You can also visit the Community Mental Health Association of Michigan's website, which I have in the box on the right-hand side of this slide. Another way to find your community mental health agency would be simply Google the name of your county along with the phrase community mental health, and your local agency should appear in the search. Now you've gotten through the transition planning process. You're working towards some post-secondary goals for adult life. You've applied for and started receiving SSI and Medicaid, and you're enrolled with your local community mental health agency. Now let's talk briefly about some options for life after school. I've got them listed here, and I'm going to go through each one in detail. I did not include college here because I wanted to focus on programs and services that you can access through the community mental health system. But college is certainly worth exploring if your student is interested. I included a resource for thinking about college that I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. One option for life after school is community employment. When looking for a job, it certainly helps to know your community and be resourceful. Sometimes it takes people working together to find a good job. If you're still in the midst of transition planning in school, the IEP team can talk about ideas for finding community employment. An agency called the Michigan Rehabilitation Services, or MRS, can also help with finding paid employment. MRS is a statewide agency that provides employment and education-related services to teens and adults with disabilities to help them find and maintain employment. MRS also works with businesses in the community to develop talent and match employees to jobs. A link to the MRS website is provided on the list of handouts, and I encourage you to check the website out and read more about what they can offer. Supported employment is a model of employment that provides people with more complex disabilities the appropriate ongoing support that is necessary for success in a competitive work environment. Support can be continuous, intermittent, or can diminish over time. It can also include job development, which means developing a job specifically for someone with a specific skill set. Supported employment can also include job coaching. A job coach is someone to be at your job with you to help you learn the job or to help with tasks that you need assistance with. Supported employment takes place in the community at a paying job, and oftentimes supported employment programs will provide transportation, but not always. Skill building programs, sometimes called day programs, are available through community mental health agencies as well. These types of programs are focused on skill development rather than immediate employment. Some examples of skill development that could be addressed at a skill building program are attendance, following directions, totally completing tasks, staying safe on a job, and problem solving. Other ways to fill your time after exiting school includes participating in the community, socializing and building relationships, volunteering, and taking part in recreational activities. You can use the paid staff I talked about earlier to facilitate these activities and to help ensure a person's health and safety. Many people actually do a combination of these things to fill their days. In conclusion, the biggest takeaway from today is that transition planning is meant to provide opportunities for conversation and support during school so that the student will have a plan and any assistance necessary to achieve their goals. The work you do during transition planning will only help make things smoother as you go into adulthood. Benefits like SSI and Medicaid help pay for a quality life, and community mental health services are available to provide the assistance needed to live that life. A colleague that helped me as I was putting this presentation together told me recently that it's so important to help your student get a vision for their future, to be able to articulate it to others, and to say it over and over and over again. If you're shooting for the stars and others around you want to shoot for the moon, you say, "Thank you, but I'll take the stars, please." Start with your vision and then build your transition plan from the ground up. always keeping an eye on that vision. I've shared some resources on this slide, but Michigan Alliance for Families has provided a nice list of all the resources I talked about throughout my presentation on their website. Some of these I didn't touch on, but they are included because they're great resources. The ARC's Center for Future Planning has some good information on their site about future planning in general. Michigan Alliance for Families has a page on their website all about transition and the transition planning process. I'm Determined was mentioned earlier in the presentation and has some great resources to get students involved in the transition planning process. And Think College is a national organization dedicated to improving inclusive higher education options for people with an intellectual disability. They have some really nice resources there as well for college planning. Even if you think college is out of reach, I encourage you to explore the Think College website because you might be surprised to learn about what assistance is available to students with intellectual disabilities. And lastly, the Pacer Center operates out of Minnesota, but has some great transition-related information and resources on their website that are usable anywhere, not just in Minnesota. I've also included my contact information here in case anyone has questions about anything you've heard today. That concludes my presentation today. Thank you all for participating.